Morrissey Show. Joining us now, just one of the best guys in entertainment and probably anywhere else, John Ondrasik from Five for Fighting, who has really stepped out and I think taken some career risks and isn't blinking a bit about it to highlight issues like Afghanistan and now Ukraine and the amazing leadership of Volodymyr Zelensky, and maybe some comparisons as to why it's so amazing. John, great to have you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ed. Nice to be with you as always.
Well, John, I mean, this is your new song, "Can One Man Change the World?" I mean, really sent chills down my spine, and it's beautiful. It's just from an artistic point of view, it's a beautiful song. It really does ask tough questions. And you never mention Volodymyr Zelensky once in this, although you do mention Ukraine, obviously. And It's very clear from this, though, who it is that you're speaking about. It's this comedian who turns out to be the only non-joker, I think, in leadership at the moment.
No, you're right. I actually started when I sat down to write it. I started with the chords from my Superman song because I just, thought it fitting that we're watching a real life Superman. And in Superman, I never mentioned Superman's name either, right? It was pretty obvious. And I think if you're looking for somebody whose stand is historic right now, there's one guy. And I think the whole dynamic changed, Ed, when, what was our first action when Russia invaded Ukraine? It was to offer Zelensky a plane ticket. Remember that? That was the first thing we did. Say, hey, here you go. We'll get you out. And I think when he basically turned to the president and Secretary Blinken and said, you can keep your plane ticket, send me some stingers, I think everybody kind of said, who is this guy? We didn't know who he was. And then watching him kind of drag the world to the right side of history and reflect his courage in his wife, who's incredibly impressive.
I was just about to mention her. I mean, she's amazing. And you mentioned, and you do make reference to that in the song too, right?
No, I mentioned Olena in the song, and they basically, I think everybody figured if he stayed, he's a dead man. But his wife's standing with him and his kids, and I think that dynamic really kind of flipped the script. Appropriate, I guess, for an actor. He flipped the script, and courage is contagious. And I thought, just being so inspired by this guy. As a songwriter, you're always looking for something to be inspired by. I just felt compelled to write a song because we don't know, how this thing's going to end. But he certainly, I think he is a Reagan. He is a Churchill. And the only difference is Reagan and Churchill weren't being hunted daily by assassination squads. So this guy, we never know when his last speech is going to be given. But at least for me, it's incredibly inspiring and it's refreshing considering the weakness and appeasement we've seen from Western leaders for decades.
John, I think part of this is sort of this feeling of unreality. This is sort of a fantasy that we constructed that this type of power demonstration was passé. And you see this in, or at least we did see it earlier in the conflict, when there was a buildup saying, this is, displays of power just show you how impotent Vladimir Putin is. And it's like, no, it's actually the opposite. Now, is it self-destructive? Will it backfire? I actually think it will. And I think that the Ukrainians have done the West a massive favor by exposing Russia's military as a corrupt, crumbling paper tiger. That doesn't, of course, they still have nuclear weapons, and that's right. That's a whole other category. But their ground forces and their air force are far less effective than anybody ever imagined. And so, at least in that sense, we're getting that. But I think the bigger thing that Zelensky is providing, and Olena Zelenska, and for that matter, the Klitschko brothers, Petro Poroshenko, who is a almost like a blood feud rival to Zelensky, going out in the streets and taking up arms, as comrades in arms, at least for right now. I mean, I think that really does force us all to have the scales drop from our eyes and realize that the history didn't end in 1990, and it's still the same old world it's always been.
No, I think you're right. I think it's a big wake up call, and certainly it goes way beyond Ukraine. And he's the kind of figure, and there's very few of them, that forces you to ask yourself, what would you do in that situation? If you were, the president of a country and you're being attacked, would you take that plane ticket or would you die? And by him doing that, and also his eloquence and his just kind of real man guy, he's a little dude wearing a t-shirt. And we look at him, we see ourselves in him and say, what would we do? And then you see his inspiration to the Ukrainian people with mothers in their apartments with AK-47s saying, oh, I'm staying here, and the children in the background. It forces us to look at ourselves in the mirror, and it strengthens us. It actually, I think, shames us as just people and as nations, and it empowers and inspires us. So you're right. Hopefully this is a big wake-up call that actual evil exists. We've been self-wallowing in the self-hatred in the West of how evil we are. And with wokeism, we're all horribly racist and sexist and the worst thing the world's ever seen. But then when you see real evil, you see this man, Putin, his aggression, his atrocities, killing civilians and bombing hospitals. It makes our kind of conversation the last 10, 15 years seem rather trivial and shallow. And hopefully that does take some of the scales off our eyes. But, I'm still not convinced. That's why we have to support this man. And that's why we can't allow him to be devoured by Russia, sweep it under the rug like we have done for Afghanistan.
And why we really can't push him into surrender, right? I mean, because again, I mean, you mentioned the fact that they were going to send him, they're going to try to find a way to extract him, exfiltrate him. When we get back to the whole concept of exfiltration in a moment, because I do want to talk about Afghanistan here for just a little bit.
Yeah.
But and he did, he declined that, said, I don't need a ticket. I need stingers. I need javelins. But I mean, you could see, especially in the first few days, that the West was really not sure how to go on this. And I'm not just meaning Joe Biden. I'm also talking about Germany. I'm talking about,
of course.
I mean, France was probably tougher than anybody right at first. Macron was actually pretty firm on this stuff. But you could see this sort of buckle initially in the West, saying, well, maybe we need to, allow for a petition. Maybe Zelensky needs to, resign and let another, because we just don't want war. We just don't want war. And I think that this has been a reminder that there are some things that are actually worse than war, which is the fact that if you buckle down to tyrants like Putin, you're going to get a lot more war. It's better to go early than to go late in those situations.
It has been interesting to see who stands up. You never know, right?
Yep.
The actors. I mean, just this week or last week, you saw the prime ministers of Poland, I believe Czechoslovakia and Slovenia go to Kyiv. Okay, go physically stand there with Zelensky. That doesn't happen without a leader like Zelensky. And I do think the West was just planning on managing the fall. It's going to be a couple days, and then Putin will put his guy in there, and then, okay, don't come after us again. And even now they're dumbfounded. Nobody more so than Putin. And they don't know how to deal with it. They've been exercising appeasement for decades. You've talked about it, Crimea, Syria, even Hong Kong. We didn't talk about what do we know about Hong Kong? Oh, that LeBron James tried to get Daryl Morey fired. That's all we talk about. Not the fact that we allowed basically China to come take over Hong Kong and crush freedom of expression there. Right. So we've been used to this pattern of just appeasement. And when you see somebody standing up to that, they don't know what to do because it's not in their nature. But yeah, and I sympathize with the president to a certain degree. This is different than Afghanistan. Afghanistan was just a pure moral debacle, Orwellian disgrace that they'll carry with them the rest of their lives. You're right. Putin has nukes. He has chemical weapons. I understand that, the consequences of a no-fly zone. But as you said, if we are just paralyzed and allow kind of to sit on the sidelines and allow Zelensky and Ukraine to be devoured, who thinks it's going to stop there? It's not going to stop there. So yeah, it'll be very, I'd say interesting, but more than interesting, it's critical how we support Zelensky in any way we can in Ukraine. It's a tipping point of history. China's watching, Iran's watching. We always thought this would be the first domino to fall after Afghanistan. It has. Taiwan, if we allow Ukraine to go backwards, I'm sure Taiwan will be next.
Right.
So I don't know if the consequences has been more critical in my lifetime.
So let's get to the song before we get to Afghanistan, because I want to talk about the song a little bit. You already started mentioning how you created it, how you structured it, the chord progression, which again is a beautiful song. People,
thank you.
And we're gonna embed it. I'll have the producers embed this in the podcast once we get to that point. Sure. But one thing interesting about the song, you actually have publicly released the rights to it, so that people can incorporate it into their own videos. I mean, that is an extremely generous thing to do, because I play in the right space too. We're kind of particular about when people start scraping our content to do other things with it. That is an incredibly generous thing to do. And tell me a little bit about that.
Well, again, this thing came so fast. I literally wrote it, recorded it, and uploaded it within 48 hours, and I had no expectation for much of a response, but it was quite a large response. And I saw, how it was shining the light on Zelensky and providing, fundraising opportunities, whatever. And I could see, similar to like my song Superman, I had people call me and say, can I use your song for hold music for my company? I hadn't seen that in 20 years. So I saw how it was reaching folks, and I'm like, this is not a single. This is not a song to monetize or chase up the charts, or it's a song that has a mission behind it. And so I think it was important to, and at the same time, because I released it so quickly, it wasn't on any of the streaming platforms. Nobody could find it beyond the lyric video. So yeah, we put it up for free on Bandcamp, and I talked to my publishers and said, look, anybody who wants to make a video of this song, this is more important than monetizing your 25 cents, per stream or whatever. Right. And they totally agreed. So yeah, so it's out there for the world to use or not. And hopefully there'll be more songs like this. We've talked about this, Ed, about kind of our disappointment that there hasn't been more advocacy for Afghanistan from the arts. And there should be more for Ukraine. There should be, a Live Aid for Ukraine. I don't understand where the arts community has lost some of their soul for these huge issues. But maybe there'll be more. So hopefully, I have seen a few, but hopefully there'll be more.
Well, I was just about to ask you about that right after I get over the dry heaves, remembering some of the hold music battles that I had to fight back in my previous career. Oh my gosh. I mean, back in the day, it was like, it was sort of like the Wild West, and then you start getting all these letters threatening lawsuits because you're playing you're playing Kiss FM through the through the hold music, and it's like, well, first off, Kiss FM may not have been the best choice anyway, but I digress. Yeah, I mean, I kind of understand. I don't agree with it, but I kind of understand the politics involved and why people weren't speaking out about Afghanistan. I think it's a disgrace.
Yeah.
Right? But I understand why, is because it looked bad for Joe Biden, and they didn't want to make Joe Biden look bad.
Right.
I'm not quite sure why there would be a reluctance in this case to do that. And I don't know. I was going to ask you, I haven't seen a whole lot about it, but maybe you've seen more advocacy here about standing firm with Ukraine in the entertainment zone. I haven't seen a lot of it myself, but I mean, I may be missing it.
No, well, look, Bono wrote a poem
I saw that.
He had Nancy Pelosi read it. Wouldn't have been my first choice for someone to read my poem, but hey, no more power to him. So at least he said something. You see a lot of Ukrainian artists, of course, writing and singing. But it's weird. It's weird in the culture here. It's almost like we're in this bubble, and whatever happens outside of the world doesn't matter to our TikToks, and it's a pretty shallow culture in the arts. Yeah, it's just, I think that it's a statement on who we are as a culture. What are we writing about? What are we talking about? What are artists advocating for? Certainly, there are some people who are doing it. Angelina Jolie's been very vocal for Afghanistan. There's some people doing it, but the usual suspects who like to talk about compassion, human rights, and in their music and in their brand, frankly, some of those folks have been pretty silent over the last year when we're having historical generational events that are literally killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, both in Afghanistan and Ukraine. With humanitarian crises we haven't seen in decades. So, all I can do is write one song, and hopefully others will find their voice as well.
And before we wrap up, what's the latest that you're hearing from exfiltrating Americans and American allies out of Afghanistan?
It's a tough slog. There's so many roadblocks. The State Department has not been helpful, as you know. The Taliban is making it very hard to get flights out. There was actually just a horrible scam that cost some of these orgs over $1 million. They're so desperate to help people, they're being taken advantage of. At the same time, they're doing incredible work still. They're getting people out. One of my organizations I work with, Save Our Allies, just today was announced. They were instrumental in getting the Fox News reporter who was almost killed out of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They had special forces in there, so they're now in Ukraine because they do the right thing. I think they have the soul and the character of what we grew up with America being the good guys and going after the bad guys and keeping promises. So as tough and frustrating it is for them, they're not quitting. They're still going at it. They're getting a few people out, but one of the realities of Ukraine is it has sucked up all the energy from and to be honest with you, appropriately, from Afghanistan, and all the focus is there, and so it's harder for them to raise money. So we're still doing some more projects. There'll be things to announce in the next few weeks about Afghanistan. We can do both. We can stand for Zelensky in Ukraine, and we can keep our promise to our allies in Afghanistan. So that's my mission, to continue doing both. And we'll have some announcements for keeping Afghanistan in the spotlight, even though Joe Biden did not mention it in his State of the Union. We'll try to mention it and keep the focus on that reality, which in many senses, at least in a humanitarian light, is as tragic and horrible as Ukraine.
Right. Yes. And we have to do both, John. I mean, we have to be able to multitask here, and that means we have to be able to have eyes in both directions here. And John, I know that you have set up a website, and I'm sorry that the URL just escapes me, on the Afghanistan fight. Of course, you can go to fightforfighting.com. That's the obvious, the obvious website for John. But I mean, you did set up a different domain name, right, that directed people to the Afghanistan effort.
Yeah, for anybody that wants to support these orgs, we have a website, whatkindofworlddouwant.com. And if you go there and you click on that Americans for Afghanistan link, that money goes to 501c3 California Community Foundation. And then I just distribute it to these orgs. Actually, today I filled out one to give a donation to Project Exodus Relief for $5,000. So that money is going to go directly to these orgs. Doesn't go to me. You can also just Google them, yourselves, and donate. And as far as the song, if you go to fightforfighting.com and you want to download "Can One Man Save the World" for free, again, you just click on the link, put 0 in the box, and you have the download to share at will. So I appreciate everybody. We the song's called Can One Man Save the World? Well, certainly one person can't save the world if they're alone in this. So it's up to us to share the message for both Ukraine and Afghanistan. And if we all do that, I think we'll move the needle.
So you can go to fiveforfighting.com for that. And if my expert engineers and producers match up with their usual terrific work, you'll see that probably following this segment right here, Can One Man Save the World, if you haven't seen it yet. And if for some reason I have overstated our capabilities here, just look it up on YouTube or go to fiveforfighting.com. And they're great. They're terrific. I'm sure it's going to play right after this. John Ondrasik from fiveforfighting.com. Thanks so much, not just for being here, because, I just love talking to you, but just for everything that you're doing. And thank you so much.
Hey, I love hot air. I get a lot of my news there, so it goes back at your team effort. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, sir. Stay tuned for more, and maybe Can One Man Save the World?
Who is this comedian? His audience more mice than men. The Superman, Ukrainian, I don't know. Great-grandson of the Holocaust, an Eastern heart the West has lost. Nail or carry up his cross, I don't know. But he's got everyone thinking. Yeah, he's got all of us thinking. Can one man save the world in 1,000 years? Will they say your name, or is this all in vain? Can one man save the world? Will you take my hand? Will you help me stand? Still in the end, can one man save the world? Olena pulls him to her breast. The bear, the devil stabs their chest. Can one embrace raise the oppressed? I don't know. Does freedom still have appetite? Is there the will, the goods to fight? Can a single flame light up the night? I don't know. Yeah, but he's got you all thinking. 'Cause everyone's thinking. Can one man save the world in 1,000 years? Will they say your name, or is this all in vain? Can one man save the world? Will you take my hand? Will you help me stand? Still in the end, can one man save the world? Am I alone in this? He says, am I alone in this? He says, are we alone? In 1,000 years, will they know your name? Can one man save the world? Will you take my hand? Will you help me stand? Still in the end, can one man save the world? Will you take my hand? Raise up lesser men in the end. Who is this comedian? This steel that is Ukrainian. We die but maybe live again. Can one man save the world?
Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show. Joining us as always on Tuesdays, my co-host, my partner in crime, the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of RedState.com, Andrew Malcolm, at AH Malcolm on the Twitters. Andrew, welcome back.
Hey, thank you, Edward. That always gets me. Your introduction is just, it boosts me for at least an hour.
Well, and it's important that we note the passage of time, because the passage of time is very important to the passage of time. And time goes on so slowly. I'm sorry, that's I'm riffing off a Kamala Harris thing, which we won't play here because it won't really come through very well. But there's this word salad. I mean, Kamala Harris really needs a speechwriter, or she needs to be told to stick to the speech, because when she riffs, it's not good, Andrew. And she went off in this 30-second thing about the passage of time and the importance of the passage of time and how time is important to the passage of time. And yeah.
Well, there's one thing about time. It keeps on passing.
Well, it's just a matter of time.
Until it passes some more.
Until it passes some more, then it's a matter of some other time. I would be remiss if I did not mention at this point the fabulously classic Brooke Benton song, "It's Just a Matter of Time," one of the greatest songs ever, sung by one of the greatest singers ever. I'm sorry, I just got to work that sucker in there. Well,
is that going to be with the post?
It might be. I mean, I might take a look at that to see if I can work that into a post. I haven't written on any of this, but if I write about Kamala Harris, I'm going to work in the Brooke Benton song, because there's at least 2 generations that probably have never heard this. And it's maybe he and Barry White are probably the 2 best pop singer baritones that have ever been around. And there's so few of them, right? Not a lot of baritones or pop singers. Maybe those 2 and Leon Redbone. This might be the 3rd. But, and I'm sure I'll get emails. What about so-and-so? And I'll be going, yeah, right. I guess I forgot about that person. But yeah, it's just a matter of time. All right. Speaking of baritones, is Leah Thomas a baritone? Now we might go there in a minute. We're going to be talking about media bias and all sorts of things, but we're going to start off with Andrew's excellent column about what's going on in Ukraine, how Ukraine snipers are picking off Russian generals one by one. This is, I believe, out in the clear, right? This is not a VIP post.
Right. The Sunday column was on on Sasha, the Fox News producer who got killed last week.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And I wrote about her and all of the Sashas that I have known in my career overseas. These are essential people. They're wonderful, good-hearted. They end up being anonymous. And in her case, sadly, she ended up being dead. But along with the cameraman when they were ambushed just outside Kiev. But young woman, 24, full of energy and life. And I got access to her Instagram account and wrote about what kind of a person she seemed to be from her posts. And I found that to be unusually touching. I've covered a lot of stuff in 55 years or 56 years, whatever it is, but it's that one kind of struck home for me. The sniper one, which is going crazy because it's in the open at Red State at the moment, is amazing to me. David Petraeus, we all know, had a 37-year career in the Army, brilliant man, 4-star general, and he was also head of the CIA for a while. But Jake Tapper got him on analyzing what's going on in Ukraine,
right.
and the general went into some detail that I knew nothing about how the Russian communication system is so crummy and shoddy that they had to go, it failed all the time during the invasion, and they had to go to what he calls single channel. The Ukrainians jammed it, so the Russians went to cell phones, and the Ukrainians took down the number code for Russia cell phones, so the Russians couldn't use their cell phones for the generals to talk to each other. And so they ended up stealing civilian cell phones from Ukrainians and calling domestically inside Ukraine, which of course makes them very vulnerable to tracking. So what happens, I'll say it briefly, there's a lot of fascinating detail in the post, but what happens is the Russian non-commissioned officer corps is terrible or non-existent, and so you have soldiers on the line with no real leadership. The general's getting in trouble from Moscow because things aren't going well. The soldiers on the line get stopped by Ukrainians who are motivated to protect their homeland. These guys, Russians, are conscripts. And they were told that they'd be welcomed as liberators, and suddenly people are shooting at them. And so the advance gets stalled. So the general comes up to see what the heck is going on, because they don't have the communications, as I mentioned, and boom, Ukrainian sharpshooters nail them. And now there's almost a dozen senior officers who've been clipped, including 5 generals. And we had a picture of one of them. It didn't look like he was having trouble finding foodstuffs like so many Russian soldiers, I guess. But they've been sacking and looting for food. And some of them have just downright surrendered to the Ukrainians because they didn't have any food or water or fuel, and they don't want to go home. So kind of a mess there. And one of my colleagues at Red State has a post about sabotage going on in Belarus on the railroad, bringing supplies to the Russian troops. So it's kind of a mess, but the Petraeus story and his presentation of it, I just found absolutely fascinating. I'm into military history and tactics, and I've always liked him anyway. So anyway, there's good stuff in there for a read.
Definitely great stuff, and you should read Andrew's column. I'm going to provide a little context, because I did some research on this myself for a VIP post I did. I think it was on Friday, must have been Friday, and the Russians have lost either 4 or 5 generals at this. I think there was another one today or yesterday. So 5 generals in just a little over 3 weeks, right? Of combat,
and four more sacked in Moscow for the poor performance.
Well, that's actually not as unusual, but I mean, let's stick with the ones that have been shot, right, or killed in action. And 2 things: the number and where they've been killed are both very, very telling here. And where they've been killed is on the front line. And generals don't, in modern warfare, generals don't go to the front unless there's a problem. For this very reason, because generals have a lot of operational, tactical, and strategic information and knowledge that makes them extremely valuable. So you don't want them captured, and you don't want them killed. You really don't want them captured, but you don't want them killed either. So they shouldn't be up there. The only reason that they be up there is because the communication is so bad, which is what you've been talking about, that they can't get the units unstuck, or the morale is really bad, and they need to go up there and personally kick ass. And you see this in the movie Patton. You see this where Patton is charging around in different parts of the front, and firing a major and putting somebody else in his place because he can't figure out where to cross the river, and Patton's already done it twice. I mean, there's that scene in there, but you generally don't want to do that with your generals because they are so valuable. And as a comparison, I went back and I took a look at how many American generals we lost in various different wars. And we just lost one about 8 years ago in Afghanistan, Major General Harold Green. And that was an assassination. He wasn't on the front line of combat. That was an assassination.
That was a turncoat. That was being trained. And to me, a terrible part of that is that Obama did not go to the funeral.
Yes, I remember that, right? And then there was another general who was killed on 9/11. He was in the Pentagon, which should count as a combat death. Sometimes people forget to count that as a combat death, but Lieutenant General Timothy Maude was killed in the Pentagon on 9/11. But prior to that, the last American general to die in a combat situation was in 1972. We haven't lost. I mean, we've done major combat operations, ground combat operations in Afghanistan for several years, in Iraq for several years, and we haven't lost a single general in any of those combat formations. Again, the one that we did lose in Afghanistan was an assassination attempt that wasn't anywhere near the front line. We lost 13 generals, one of whom was from a heart attack, actually, in combat theaters in Vietnam, and that was over in a 13-year period. To lose 4 or 5 generals in a 4-week period of time, less than 4 weeks, is stunningly bad. I mean, stunningly bad. This is complete incompetence on the part of the Russian military, and likely because it was probably caused by that incompetence, because the generals had no choice but to go up there with their mortar boards, right? So it makes them a super easy target.
They have very big hats.
Yes, they do.
The general, but that doesn't protect them. But their hats are huge.
Yes, they're easy to spot.
Hats make the man. I mean, those are.
Well, they make the target.
Yeah, that's right.
They certainly make the target. So that brings us to, well, the generals aren't the only ones dying out there from in the Russian military. And earlier today, in Alapundit, by the time this podcast drops, you've already been able to read Alapundit's post on this. He's working on it as we're speaking. There was a Russian newspaper that actually published what looks to be accurate numbers of killed and missing in action in Russia, and that number is around 9,300 soldiers killed in action, which is in Ukraine. And that's far more than what we lost in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. It's more. It's 2/3 the number that the Soviets lost in Afghanistan over 9 years. I mean, this is, again, less than 4 weeks of combat. They have killed 92, they've had 9,200 of their soldiers killed. I'm going to look this up really quickly here. I'm not sure. It was the injured, wounded, or 16,153. I don't think it had an MIA number in it. Now, this was posted by Komsomolskaya Pravda, a pro-Kremlin tabloid, apparently. 9,861 killed in action. Almost 10,000, close to 10,000 soldiers. And then, of course, they took it down. Because apparently that was not the message that they wanted out to the Russian people. That is stunning. I mean, it's a stunning number. I mean, and it really does underscore what you wrote about, which is that this is just a complete catastrophe for the Russian military, and it's not getting any better either.
No, they have so much more, I guess, bodies to throw into the chopper than the Ukrainians do. But as Petraeus pointed out in the article, they have roughly, Ukraine, 200,000 in the military, but there are millions of would-be guerrillas. I mean, it's like the American Revolution in the sense that everybody's chipping in with a Molotov cocktail, with the jamming of radios, with making things difficult for the Russians. So he said, you can't just go by the numbers. But you're right. It's an awful thing. The Russian soldiers, I guess, are mainly conscripts. They were misled that they would be welcomed as liberators, and it's inexperienced. They all must serve 1 year, and of course, maybe a third of that is supposed to be taken up by training. But it sounds as if a lot of them were just rushed in and thrown at into the fight, and you know, if anybody who saw the movie Enemy at the Gates, that's it's about snipers, but it was the Russians doing the sniping on Germans. This case, it's the Russians taking it. But there was a scene in Enemy at the Gates where they didn't have enough guns in Stalingrad, weapons, so they hand out. So they gave a clip of ammunition to each Russian soldier and a rifle to one of them, and every other one. And they said, when the soldier in front of you gets killed, pick up the rifle. Go on to say, what an inspiring mission, a statement to be sent to. But that's what they did. Stalin, what he did against the Germans, just keep throwing people at them. And I guess in the end it worked.
Yep.
Not for the people who got thrown.
Well, more is coming. Obviously, we'll talk over the next couple of weeks, except for my vacation, which is coming up. By the way, I should mention I'll be the first week of April, last week of March, really. I'll be out, so we won't be doing podcasts during that period of time. But
so that's next week.
Yeah, next week. So
okay.
We won't be talking next week. But of course, this Ukraine is going to continue to be a story no matter.
No, I think the story will just die off for a week till you get back.
Well, I'd actually like that. If the war would just disappear, I'd take a permanent vacation. But no, it's not going to happen. So, let's move to something a little closer to home, both in terms of geography and in terms of our focus on media bias. Late last week, the New York Times delivered a scoop. A scoop, I tell you, Andrew Malcolm. The scoop is that they got some emails off of Hunter Biden's laptop. And it turns out that the Department of Justice is doing a wide-ranging criminal probe of Hunter Biden. It's not just about whether he paid his taxes. It's also about his business dealings in Ukraine and other countries and connections to Joe Biden and Joe Biden's politics. And they wanted you to know that this is a big scoop. The New York Times acquired these things. The same laptop that the New York Post wrote about 17 months ago, and that NPR said that they weren't going to waste their time on, that Twitter and Facebook, blocked people from accessing or sending. I mean, you have to have a lot of chutzpah at this point to claim that you've gotten a scoop off of Hunter Biden's laptop. If you're not the New York Post, at least, you have to have a lot of chutzpah at this point.
Chutzpah and arrogance. I mean, that's just, it's disappointing. It's not the New York Times that I worked for so long. Now, there was a bias there. I don't know if you call it a bias. There was a mode of thinking there that even though something might have been reported somewhere else and you were obligated to say if somebody else had something first, it wasn't really recorded until the New York Times, a newspaper of record, had it. So you would go into some depth and length on stories that others had because it had not been made available to New York Times readers. That's a long time ago, but this is just blatant chutzpah. Yeah.
Well,
right.
I would argue that I wouldn't even necessarily argue that that's a bad thing, as long as the New York Times acknowledged that the New York Post had actually exposed this in the first place. The words New York Post never actually appeared in this article, ever. They didn't acknowledge that this was something that had been already openly discussed, something that had been openly debated.
That's shameful. That's just shameful.
I mean, it's just crazy. It's crazy. So at the same time, the New York Post is actually feasting on this for a while. And God bless them. I think they deserve it after all the crap they took publishing these stories in the first place. But I think there's a really interesting question here, which is that what about all the people who said that this was Russian disinformation? I mean, it wasn't just Joe Biden saying that.
No.
It wasn't just
Hillary.
The White House. Well, Hillary too. But what about the 51 former Intel officials that insisted that you couldn't take this seriously, that it smelled like Russian disinformation, and that we should just not even pay attention to anything that the New York Post. I mean, they signed a letter, right? James Clapper is one of the names on the list. Leon Panetta, who is normally, I think, better than this. My guess is he got talked into this, and he's probably regretting it. But James Clapper is one of the guys who's currently an intel analyst for CNN.
It's just ridiculous. Well, Leon Panetta is in my scrapbook of infamy for having been Secretary of Defense during Benghazi.
Right.
And the next day, answering a question about why weren't reinforcements sent in, you had a drone watching everything, and he said, "Well, you don't send troops in where you don't know what's happening." Really? I mean,
okay.
This is why they trained for years for anything that might happen. Yeah, I mean, it's just, well, yeah, you only send troops into safe places that you know and can control already. So anyway, yeah, you're right, Ed. It's and the Post had a wonderful headline about it. Was it big letters, lies?
Spies who lie. Spies who lie.
Spies who lie.
I like that one so much I actually had to clip out the front page and put it into made it the header for the Post at hot air. But I mean this calls into question something that has been an ongoing issue in media, right? Which is the hiring of politically motivated hacks as analysts. Now, I don't mind if you're bringing somebody on who served in an administration, and James Clapper is a special case, even in this sense, to say, well, this is a person representing the Democrat point of view. This is a person representing the Republican point of view. So I don't have a problem if Sean Spicer comes on to talk about, defending the Trump administration record, or Donna Brazil to defend whatever, right? But I mean, these people were, they had partisan roles. They are not analysts in any sort of sense. They're not independent analysts at the very least.
No, they're not.
And James Clapper in particular, Andrew, we got to talk about James Clapper in particular. This is a guy who lied to Congress. And this isn't just a partisan issue here. I mean, he was serving in Barack Obama's administration as the director of national intelligence, and he flat out lied to Congress on multiple occasions. And Democrat Ron Wyden of Oregon, who's not exactly a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, right? I mean, this guy's way out progressive, wanted him tried for perjury over it. He was furious over this. Others, I mean, the bipartisan anger about James Clapper was notable. And Obama refused to fire him. In fact, put him in charge of, fixing the credibility issues in the intelligence community, which is one of the stupidly ironic moments of that period. And then as soon as the Obama administration closed up shop, CNN hired him.
Yeah.
Even though he had repeatedly lied to people, presumably, or at least ostensibly under oath, or at least under, the normal compulsion to tell the truth when you're testifying to Congress. I mean,
well, I remember, I think it was Leslie Stahl or somebody was interviewing him, or no, Diane Sawyer. Diane Sawyer, yeah, and he was in a joint interview with somebody else, and he said flat out, "Gee, I didn't know about this. It was some terrorist incident in London," and the woman reporter said, "Wait, you didn't know about it? The DNI did not know about this?" So yeah, I don't find him all that impressive, but some of the others in there, I kind of had respected them over time. And
you notice that most of them didn't want to respond to the question, right?
No, of course not. No, of course not.
They all shined the Post on when it came.
They got their advance for their books, and they wrote about, and the CIA cleared, of course, the books from the CIA people. It's just Washington. This is a real bipartisan issue. Washington takes care of each other.
Yep.
Okay. Now, you remember all the people that got fired for that IRS bias against conservative groups? None.
Yep. Zero.
And all the people that got tried for letting 4 Americans die in Benghazi?
Oh yeah, I remember all zero of those. Yeah.
Yeah, there were none. The Admiral Mullen, who's another guy that shows up on TV all the time, he was in charge of the Accountability Review Board on Benghazi. He didn't even bother to interview the Secretary of State, who was running the show all night long at the State Department as these men were killed. And the president, we still don't know what he was doing for 15 hours. He talked to Hillary at 5 the afternoon when the trouble started in Washington time. And he wasn't seen until the next morning when he promised swift justice, and then went off to some fundraisers in Las Vegas. And we got one guy got arrested, and he's not in Guantanamo. Yeah, it's a cesspool. Washington is a cesspool. I refuse to work there. I was there in graduate school working, and it's just packed journalism. Even way back when I was in university, and I couldn't stand it, so I refused to work there.
Yep. All right, last story, and I sent this over to you right before we jumped on this. You know, the whole Leah Thomas transgender athletics story is very interesting. There's lots of different takes on this, but there is a media angle here that we got to discuss. The NBC News was covering this, right? And this was at a
NCAA championships.
NCAA championship, and NBC was covering this, and this was Leah Thomas. Well, he or she, whatever. Andrew's not going to see this, but he's watching it on his own device there. This is what it looked like when Leah Thomas was in the pool. This is something that, this is the actual photograph or a screen capture from the video. This was the picture, though, that NBC News used on their Today Show report. Very clearly, heavily airbrushed, right? I mean, to the point where this is, I was joking with Andrew before we started recording the podcast. This is almost as bad as the moonlighting shots where they backlit Sybil Shepherd and fuzzied up the lens. Even though Sybil Shepherd is a beautiful woman, there was no need to do that. It was a sort of style thing that moonlighting used to do. Just used to drive me up the wall. But again, just here's reality. And here's what NBC News used on the Today Show to cover this. I mean, that's not even good airbrushing, man. That's
and there's no ethics. I understand the need they have in recent times promoted people who did not serve the long apprenticeships that they used to, and so they don't have an opportunity to absorb the culture of ethics and diligence. But this keeps happening often, and it often seems to come from NBC. And remember MSNBC selectively editing audio tapes out of Florida for some a while back. It's just I don't know what we can do about it except
that was the George Zimmerman case. They were editing the audio from the 9/11 calls. And then the New York Times just recently did the same thing with it, even though it had been long debunked, right? I mean, what news agency airbrushes a news photo? I mean, I understand if you're a photographer.
Oh, that's a firing offense in my day when I was there. There was a wonderful photographer, a highly professional photographer who rearranged some flowers in a flag picture for July 4th. And I don't know how they found out about it, but he rearranged the flowers at a newsstand, and he got fired.
Yep, for creating news rather than reporting news. And nobody's going to get fired over this because nobody's going to shame anymore.
Nobody gets fired. There are no consequences for anything bad these days. None.
Exactly. I'm reminded though, and this is actually a pretty good movie. Certainly a memorable movie. William Hurt just passed away. He was one of the stars of this broadcast news.
Oh,
Albert Brooks. Love Albert Brooks. Holly Hunter. I love Holly Hunter. There's Joan Cusack's in it. It's got some great, Robert Prosky is in it. There was all sorts of great acting in it. And it really did sort of serve as a warning as to what was going to come, or what was already coming at the time. I mean, it's really about what was already coming at the time. But there's a scene, I mean, I'm not sure if you're going to remember this scene, but it's always kind of stuck with me, where she and Albert Brooks are in a, like a commando camp, or not a commando camp, but like a, what was the Contras, right? It's supposed to be like the Contras. Somebody is, they're getting footage. You're getting like B-roll footage, right? And they want to get a shot of a guy putting his boots on. So they ask the guy, why don't you put your boots on? Oleander says, no, we don't do that. We don't do that. And the guy's staring at her like she's insane. And she goes, sir, if you'd like to put your boots on, that's fine. But you don't feel like you have to do it. Guy's like, okay. But I mean, that was sort of the standard. It's the standard that you're talking about. Those are the standards that are getting arrested.
Wasn't it Albert Brooks who said he was talking to William Hurt on the set, and he said, I say it here and it comes out there.
Yes. Yeah. It's actually a brilliant movie. And Albert Brooks is just so good in that movie. If you haven't seen Broadcast News, everybody here has probably seen Broadcast News, but if you haven't, you should watch it, because it talks about those standards, and they were disappearing at that point in time. They're gone now. I mean, this airbrushing of the Leah Thomas photo is just, it's embarrassing. It's so bad. All right. But you know what's not embarrassing?
Didn't the Babylon Bee got banned from Twitter for giving the Man of the Year award to Leah Thomas. They've been suspended.
Yeah.
They had a headline last week that said that the NCAA champion swimmer was caught with performance enhancing testicles.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I mean, I think that you can hold whatever opinion you want to hold on that. I have my own opinion. I expressed it this morning. And this is a situation the NCAA could fix in a heartbeat, just by simply creating a transgender category for competition, and having people, requiring people to either enter into their biological sex category for competition, or opting for the transgender category. And problem solved. You don't even have to have a debate over this. But the NCAA doesn't want to do that, because they don't want to have to take a stand that there is such a thing as biological sex, which is ludicrous, right? For all the people that are talking about, we got to follow the science. Biology apparently is not one of the sciences that you have to follow. You
got that one right.
I guess okay, all right, but that type of thing really should be wrong, no matter which side of that question that you're on. Yeah. I mean, that is trying to falsify a record in order to make a particular argument sympathetic in a way that a news agency never should do. So, by the way, do you remember what the big reveal was on Broadcast News? What the big climax, what the big scandal that actually broke everybody in Broadcast News? Remember that?
No.
William Hurt they didn't have two cameras for an interview that he was doing with the victim of sexual date rape, right? And they decided that they were going to mock him up crying and and insert it into the thing. Now, that was bad. I mean, it kind of was bad. And that was the thing that, Albert Brooks's character sort of revealed to Holly Hunter as a parting shot at William Hurt's character. But this isn't really that far off.
No. It's yeah. I don't know what to say. You can only look at it and shake your head and then reward the organizations that don't do that, and punish the ones that do it by not patronizing them. I
agree.
I just don't understand people watching CNN and then complaining about it. I think, well, then don't watch it. There was a cartoon I saw over the weekend of an older couple watching the television news, And the newscaster said, well, we'll have Brett here with the Republican weather in a few moments, and then Diane with the Democrat weather.
No, that's perfect. There you go.
Equal time.
Equal time. I think I'd want to get. I think I'd want to have a talk for the libertarian weather.
Yeah.
Here's the libertarian weather report. It's none of your damn business. None of it. It's not government's business to be involved in the weather.
I don't take the government's word for what the weather will be.
If you want to know what the weather is, go out and take a look in your backyard. Right. It's never none of the government's business. Fun.
I did a feature one time in Iowa on the life in a small town radio station, and the studio was actually put in the display window of a former hardware store. And I was sitting there with the guy, and he was interviewing me about me interviewing him. And he said, but he interrupted and he said, it's 12 o'clock in downtown Charles City and sunny.
All right. Well, we're obviously having too much fun, Andrew, which means that
we got to stop this. We have serious.
We have to get serious and get to the jokes of the week.
Okay. Well, these are older ones. There's Fallon Replay. He says in New York, he says, it's crazy here. The annual World Clown Convention is right here in New York City. You should see the traffic out there. There's like one car. I always like that one. David Letterman said, even the Taliban follows daylight savings time. They've now set their clocks back to the 17th century.
And that's being kind.
Yeah. And finally, Seth Meyers replaces chocolate maker Hershey is, oh no, I did this one last week. Never mind. Seth Meyers replay. He says researchers have discovered the first T-Rex fossil within the Arctic Circle. The T-Rex apparently froze to death because he couldn't button his jacket with those little arms.
Well, that would, I often wondered about that.
I know.
All right. Well, we have Andrew here every single week that we do this podcast.
Except not next week,
because I'm Goldbricking next week. But every other Tuesday, Andrew Malcolm is right here. And of course, you can find him at Twitter. He's the Prince of Twitter at AH Malcolm on Twitter. He is the regent of redstate.com. You can go over there and read his article, which is in the clear. This article is in the clear. How Ukraine snipers are picking off Russian generals one by one. You can also find Andrew's reflection on the woman who Fox News reporter Sasha Kuvshinova, who was killed in combat, and his reflection on the bravery and the necessity of war correspondence, and all the sacrifices that they make so that we can find out what's actually going on. And as much as Andrew and I are critical of bad media practices, you have to remember that there are an awful lot of journalists out there who are putting themselves in harm's way to get us the information that we need to make well-informed choices about public policy. God bless Sasha Kushanova and her family and all those who are, and I can't, Pierre Zakrevsky was the photographer, Pierre Zakrevsky. So
and there was a freelance guy that was killed a couple days before that. And there have been, as I understand it, a couple of Ukrainian journalists who've been killed. Of course, that's not big news in the U.S.
No.
Dangerous work. Very dangerous work.
Very dangerous work. We've got a lot of Americans who are doing it as well. And every once in a while, they pay the price for it. So God bless them all. And God bless you, Andrew. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks. So stay tuned for more from the Ed Morrissey Show podcast and from hotair.com. This is Ed Morrissey of hotair.com for Town Hall. Late last week, the CDC erased over 72,000 previously identified deaths from COVID-19 rolls, including over 30% of previously designated pediatric deaths. They said these patients died of COVID. Now they're rolling it back. A brief and ambiguous footnote announced the change, but not the scope of the adjustment, nor the actual errors involved. This has finally embarrassed the CDC's top echelons into action. In a new email to staff, CDC Director Rochelle Walensky has suddenly taken an interest in remedying the data gaps for COVID-19. The CDC did nothing to correct the obvious data collection issues when high numbers bolstered Joe Biden's political arguments for mandates and restrictions. It's likely no coincidence that the CDC is now trying to fix those issues and get lower numbers now that voters are fed up with Biden's mandates. The CDC and the Biden administration have earned the deep skepticism of American voters on COVID-19. I'm Ed Morrissey.